Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Chill Like a Mother podcast. I am Kayla Huzar, and I am here with Meghan Watson. And I first just need to say some context. So I started following Meghan on social media because she was posting time lapses of her art, her collage, her creative practice, and how it improves and or helps her process things in her life. And as an expressive arts therapist, I was like, oh, this is so great. This is so amazing. And at the time, I didn't realize or know it wasn't as overt on her profile that she was also a mom. And so, Meghan, can you share with us how that all started? Does it just come? Like, have you always been just like this creative being? As her phases?
Ooh. I have always been a creative person. I think my creativity has never been like a surprise to me. I think it is a surprise to others who know me because the way I engage in my creative self, the way that I share my creative self has really changed over my lifespan. I really do appreciate the art and the science sometimes of feeling belonging through expression, and not just like belonging with others, but like belonging with myself, and how being in a practice, whether that practice is formal or informal, it's really just about, am I expressing myself in a way that feels right? Is it a tool that I can translate or make sense of for others? And what does that mean? That's kind of where my initial creative expression and then ultimately the sharing of that came. I think for the most part, people are surprised when they see me as a creative person because most people just saw me as like, oh, she's a therapist. Right. She owns this practice and she does, work here. And my life online has not been cohesive because I am not cohesive. I think I just try new things whenever I want. But
did you feel like motherhood disrupted that creativity in some way?
That's a heavy question. I think at the point where I gave birth and when I gave birth, the 2 to 3 years prior to that, I had done so much writing and creating, mostly writing from like an expressive point of view. But it almost felt like as I was going through my pregnancy, I was gestating like my biggest creative work yet. And I don't think I realized that until after the fact. I ghost wrote for apps and mental health companies. I wrote consulting contracts. I developed programming. I started a business. I started hiring tens of clinicians over time, like because of the demand. And what kind of felt like slow, sustainable growth in the back end of it, I realized that almost every single minute, every single day of my life was surrounded by either thinking about or planning around processing some sort of creative or written outpouring. I did a lot, but I didn't do a lot for me. And I realized after I gave birth that I was exhausted by the things I was creating for others. And so around the time that I came back online, which for me was 6 months postpartum, I felt like I don't remember anything between birth and 6 months. Like at that point, you could tell me what happened. And I'd be like, yeah, that sounds right. We had pictures. Right. But at around the 6
I have
month
proof,
mark,
but
I have proof that I was alive. But like at that point, like I think my consciousness woke up and like, whoa, you're alive. You have a baby. You think things. You're a human being. And at that point, I realized that I was creatively spent. Like I was so, what's the word? It wasn't downtrodden, but I think it was just, I felt a bit degraded by all these external demands of my work and my expression. And as I tried to fight that a little bit to get my creativity back postpartum, it was a struggle. And I think I really had a hard time with not being able to think about what I wanted to write, what I wanted to say. And it brought me back to a form of expressing myself that ultimately I had not used in that way for a very long time, which was visual journaling. And if you knew me before I gave birth in 2022, you would know my entire brand was around providing journal prompts for multiplicity of different settings and scenarios, for resentment, for rejection, for all these different things. And as I wasn't able to, I literally would think about it and I'm like, I don't have anything to say. I've said all I needed to say. I've said all I need to say, or maybe I didn't. And I was really torn by this. And I went back to visual journaling. I used to bullet journal. I used to do collage and scrapbooking. I've always collected and archived my ephemera. I could give you my first train ticket to the town that I went to university in when I was in high school. And for me, it was a mix of thinking about the ways I wanted to express myself. There was this urge to do it, but I had nothing coming out. And that's where collage really deepened for me. I ended up going deeper into the medium, deeper into like the more traditional art form of it, and then starting to find the language again, the words, the prompts, the guides, the journaling kind of paths, and I melted them unknowingly. And as I was talking about it to other people, they, encouraged me to formalize that. And I think that's when I started to really see that postpartum, although I felt creatively spent, I felt like I had gestated like my largest art project to date. He's wonderful. 3.5 now. It really took a little bit of time and grace to give myself the space to realize I had been finding my way into another medium. Like I didn't have to step back into creativity the way I thought creativity was for me in that season. It actually was a bit of a turning point to a new season of creativity. And I'm still in that season. Well, maybe I'm shifting now, but I don't know. It depends.
Yeah. Can you say more about how that creativity shifted, like
Mhm.
kind of pre and postpartum, like before mom and after the title of mom? Like
Mhm.
there's something in there that's
There was an
like,
alchemy that happened.
yeah.
So the way I used to do it was I would write. I'll just like say this for the audience. I have a Substack that I have written since about 2021, but I've been writing my whole life. I used to write anonymous fan fiction on Tumblr. I will not be elaborating. I used to write short stories, poems, prose. Like I had a fantastic English teacher, and I'm from a country with a 99% literacy rate. I was born in Barbados. So the commitment to literature, grammar, and language, as well as being neurodivergent with a 99th percentile intelligence in vocabulary, at the time should have flagged hyperlexia and potentially ADHD, but that was not to be found until later. I have always been into words. And so words as like visually, like I would write things in my head like a paper. And then I would have to copy that into something. And I'd have a visceral experience, a moment in time, or I would be sitting there and something would hit me. And I would either have to open my notes app and write what I see in my head. I'd have to create some sort of vignette. It almost felt like a music video treatment. I'd create a vignette for like the scenario, and then it would just be placed there. And I would have these kind of seeds.
Okay.
So at a different point in time, I might work with a client, and that client might be dealing with attachment to an abusive parent. And they would ask me a question like, why do I still love this person even though they harmed me? And that would like cue me to a seed. And I would be like, oh my God, I thought about this. Right. Like I had this idea, and I would melt the two, and then it would kind of make its own thing, or I would adapt. Almost every Substack I've written, especially if it's about a specific scenario, like a very specific form of grief or a very specific form of like healing, is written for and to one client. I have to think about who I'm writing to in order for me to grasp the emotional tenor of how I might talk about it in a therapy session. To get that quality in a writing exercise is so hard as a therapist, because the minute the therapy session ends, my brain does this like knife slice between how I talk as a therapist and then how I talk in real life. But the writing is powerful because it's almost like you're listening to something so rich and so purposeful. I really found that I had to kind of talk to someone or to a particular concern. And that's how I would write before. Like I would kind of have these thoughts, I'd have these seeds, it would transform into something. Maybe I had a trigger or some sort of like reaction that kind of encouraged me to do that. Or I would be asked. a question online, and then that would inspire me. After I gave birth, it was like there were no more seeds. I just didn't have those strike me moments. I didn't have the energy. I didn't have the resources. I didn't have the capacity to think in that way. And it really destabilized how I saw myself because I inadvertently had attached my identity to the capacity to creatively think in this way. Now, if you think about my history, like I read a ton. I read the dictionary for fun as a kid. I would like constantly be like thesaurus and synonym, like, my God, this is exciting. I can finally say exactly what I need to say. Like precision was so important to me. And it was important to me to be precise because precision and the use of language and psycholinguistics is a huge part of establishing meaning in therapy from my perspective. And so when I use the right words and I like target it and I felt like I really had the right seeds and the right kind of like inspiration and these ideas in mind, it almost felt like that was who I was. So when I didn't have that, I didn't feel like I was creative or I didn't know who I was at all. But I came to understand that I was getting seeds, but those seeds were tactile. Those seeds were like somatic, they were physical. So I found myself doing a lot of automatic tasks. Like, you're washing bottles, you're standing up in front of, you're making your tea. You live the same day in babyhood, like every single day, the same day over. And now as a mom of a toddler, I have the same post daycare evening routine. It's like, okay, we do playtime, we do dinner, we do bath, we do bed. Playtime, dinner, bath, bed. Playtime, dinner, bath, bed. And then my husband and I buffer for about 10 minutes into space to gather our thoughts before we like decide what we want to do with our evening. And I found myself just doing a lot of repetitive tasks, and I would notice more interest in myself as I was doing those tasks. I wouldn't have ideas, but I would be more self-reflective. I would be thinking about my day to day. I'd be thinking more analysis level about my life. And that does mimic in some ways the creative process for me with writing, like analyzing, thinking. I started just cutting things out. Like I would just cut, cut shapes. I would color. And then that kind of just evolved into looking back at my materials. If you have children, if people are listening to this and you live in a city and you have an apartment, the formulation of your apartment or your home changes a million times when you give birth, when your kid gets older, the baby proofing, the moving things around, maybe you move into a larger place. You've got to get rid of like these clothes. They're growing out of that. Like we're not in the crib anymore. We're in the big bed. And there was so much moving around that I found a lot of old stuff. I found my bullet journals. I found like my magazine collections, and I started reading. And instead of writing, I started consuming material. I started reading. I started absorbing. There was a lot of shame around that because was I reading more than I was writing? Was I consuming more than I was creating? And now looking back, I think I wish I had a little bit more space for myself then, because what was alchemizing was this visual language, this visual learning identity that would become the framework to which I apply my creative practices today. So I had to be patient. I just didn't have the language to articulate what was happening at the time. It felt like a failure. But in hindsight, it was the necessary process to get to where I am now.
And where is it that you are now in that creative practice as a mom of a 3.5-year-old?
Yes.
Running a business, living in a city.
I have way more grace and respect for my process. And I went through a very difficult process last year. The top of the year, I went to a creative retreat. It was a retreat of actual, in my mind, like actual artists. Like I didn't at that point consider myself an artist. I considered myself someone who had creative leanings. I had said out loud that I was a writer, but I had never in any way thought that the drawings and the collages and the scrapbooks and any of that would consider me an artist. I was embarrassed in some ways to say that. And I think as I went to that retreat, I really was challenged by a lot of people there to acknowledge that I was a creative, to acknowledge that I was an artist. And it was emotional because on the one hand, there was this level of self-surveillance around, gosh, if I say that I'm a creative person, if I say I'm a creative, if I say I'm an artist, then people are going to tell me absolutely not. You're not. Like, they're going to tell me who I am. And I was so afraid of being told that I wasn't this thing, that I wanted to hide it. And I wanted to take away my sense of empowerment and ownership over that. And that retreat was so fundamentally life-changing because I was around creative people who valued my creativity without questioning it. They assumed that by nature of me being there, I belonged. And it was a turmoil. Like, it was 3 days of turmoil in like the Ohio country. In January of like 2025. I'm just staring at trees. It's a beautiful location. I'm just like, oh my God, maybe I am a creative person. So I would say that, yes, today I feel like I have more grace, but I'll be honest, I didn't have it until maybe last year when I just decided I was sick of myself, and I needed to just acknowledge that I did have a sense of purpose as someone who considered themselves an artist. So I started framing my collages. I started bringing more of that intentional framing to the things that I was creating. Today, my work is in my consistency and the development of my skills, any skill. So I try to do one thing a night. Depends on when my son goes to bed, if he's fighting sleep, how much I do. Initially, I was like, I wanted to do one project a day and I would have it in a notebook. But right now I'm working on an acrylic kind of painting and I have not been able to finish it because as I go back to the canvas, I find myself needing to saturate the color a bit more, to craft a fresh line, to kind of create an edge. And as I'm going through it, I really see the version of what I started to make might not be what the end result is. I get curious about mixing acrylic and pastel. And I get curious about, like, should I paste on top of this? Like, what if I introduce gouache? Or what am I doing? I don't know, but I'm doing something once a day, every day. Stay tuned. Check me in December.
Meghan, that speaks to a lot of the dichotomy and the rigidness I think that people can have, and myself included, about being a mom and making space for this and doing it and finding those margins. And so, do you notice a shift in mood or a shift in your sense of self when you are participating or not participating in that creative practice?
Yes, I think it will find its way to squeeze out of my pores one way or another.
Yes. Yes.
Not always in the ways that I wanted to, which then helps me kind of, think a little bit more intentionally of how I want to spend that energy because I'm ruminative naturally. I have a sense of consistency in my everyday with like my client work, but I do find that if I don't engage with that part of myself, I am upset. I'm upset in some form or
Yeah.
fashion. I don't feel whole all the time in that way. And it's not that I'm not whole when I am not creating. I think it's more of how am I expressing myself in a way that really feels meaningful to me. There's a lot to be said about making it accessible in order to do it. And as a mother, one of the biggest things that I did in allowing my practice to be a naturally intentional but low lift part of my everyday, it's a lot to get art materials out.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot. Is I would not be so rigid to a medium, a substrate, or a form. I also wouldn't be rigid to completion versus progress. Like anything, any movement is good movement. And I would also increase accessibility. So right before I got pregnant, I was doing a lot of painting. I would follow these hour-long meditative paint with me type YouTube videos, and my husband and I would paint the same photo and then have like a grand old time comparing our different styles.
Yeah.
He's very impressionistic. And I have like a sharp, clean, precise like brush stroke. And so I'd be like, what? This is two different two different things here, but same picture, right? So that was fun. But painting with a newborn, doing like
Mhm.
watercolors and all that, that's a lot of stuff to have out.
Mhm.
And also it's not safe to also have a lot of these materials out. So I had to shift to coloring and using pens. And then when he got older and would grab pens and then there were walls to write on, I shifted to paint sticks and tempura, and I would do more crayon level like scribbles and very rudimentary drawings. And now we have a bin that has a notebook, handful of magazines, Crayola paints, a few art supplies. There's usually art supplies in every room of the house now. Whereas before it was all like in one area,
Mhm.
we would go to that area. Pre-parenting, we just had a lot of time to be very specific about our hobbies and interests. Post, having a kid, we got to find it where we got it. And
Mhm.
so I needed to make it more visible. I needed to make it more accessible. I needed to make it easier for me to do things. I don't know if you guys can see on the video, there's like a paper that I've taped to the wall there. It doesn't have anything in it. It is aggressively attached to the wall with washi tape because my son is obsessed with spending time with me in my office,
Mhm.
getting his colors because he knows that there's always colors somewhere for him at his accessibility level. And if I'm doing notes or if I'm engaging in something that doesn't require, privacy, complete privacy, and
Mhm.
it's a weekend, then he knows if mommy's in here working that he can color, he can, use the washi tape that I have available there. He can look at the magazines. We keep art books out and I'm not precious about them. He's ripped some really beautiful art books. I'll tell you that much. Like I've my heart pains, but we keep them open so
Yeah.
that we can read them and he can read them. And for a while he wanted me to read at bedtime a 350-page collage book that had no words. So we were just making up stories and talking about the artist, and he thought that was like the best thing
Oh.
ever. So, I will read him a textbook from time to time, but it's also fun because he doesn't really care. He just wants to be with me. So once I got out of my head in terms of it has to be this way, it needs to be this form, and made things just accessible to
Mhm.
me, easy to use, I really started to shift the way that I felt creativity was possible.
Mm. Oh, I love what you said about the like shifting of all the phases within motherhood, especially those like first 3 to 5 years, about how you're like constantly shifting their bedroom and what they wear and where they sleep and what they sleep in and the surfaces and the things and the accoutrement and all the things that you need with all of that, right? At one point in my own motherhood, I thought, God is I'm going to live with plastic for the rest of my life. Like there's just going
Mhm.
to be plastic everywhere all the time. And there was this parallel that I drew within your story around how you also had to shift and change how you approached that creativeness within you within each of those phases. And
Mhm.
so how it started with like painting and then, moving it to this kind of Crayola markers and crayons. And then now you've got, a piece of paper on the wall, that's like
Just
could be
loose
used. Yeah, it could be
loose
used.
paper.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm like even looking around my own office, like as an expressive arts therapist, I mean, my kids are very well versed in creativity. And I also don't view materials as precious. Even this morning, I was in my own on the receiving end of my own expressive arts therapy session and all of my brand new Sharpie acrylic markers that I got for Christmas that I was so excited about,
Ooh.
none of them came out the color that they should be because they have been used by children who have mixed the colors before they were dried. And so I went to color something yellow and it was not yellow. It was crappy brown. And it's like, there was this moment, and ironically, you're like right in the middle of therapy, and there's all kinds of
Right.
nuances and
Right.
layers happening within that. And I'm like, okay, I'm mad about the yellow marker not being yellow, but also
Mhm.
I'm going to keep going because almost all of them came out crappy brown,
I'm so sorry, by the way. That sucks. Like, it's also okay to be pissed
Yes.
and upset about that. Like,
Yes.
"No, my
And
colors."
for a moment I was, and for like really for a moment I was, and I just kept coloring with it until the yellow came out. It was just like
Mhm.
a bit of this like, okay, it's going to be okay. It's going to be yellow again.
Mhm.
So many things were happening at that moment of like, but these are mine. This is my stuff. And this is
Yeah.
my therapy appointment. And you still found your way into my therapy appointment.
As they do.
As they do. But it was just this like full circle moment of two things can be true. I was really upset about it, and immediate urge was like, well, now I have to color with all of them to like get the color out. So two things can be true. It was like I was really upset about it, and towards the end of the session I was like, you know what? I am so happy that my children are growing up in a space where creativity is part of life, that mess is part of life, and that
Yeah.
some of my supplies are absolutely like non-negotiable. Do not touch them. Like paint and like we all got to set up safety around all these things.
Yeah, no, that's key.
Right. But like this acrylic marker, that's like, it's okay. My friend actually said to me, she was like, your kids are so lucky to be growing up in a home where art, messy, and like the mess that comes with it is like
That
it's
is
like,
not a
okay.
common thing. That's not a
No.
common thing. And I didn't have that in my life. My parents also have that. I think they cultivated that sense of desire of precision in me. I use the word precision now instead of perfectionist because I am a recovering perfectionist. And I like to think about it because as I was being challenged by this, and I work with clients who deal with perfectionism all the time, there was this idea of, well, perfectionism has gotten me to a lot of the great things that I've been able to do. You know, I'm an immigrant. I'm the only person in my entire family that lives in Canada. Everyone else lives in the Caribbean. My sister took her journey to the US. So it's like one child in the US, one child in Canada. Every other support system lives in the Caribbean. And as I was like growing in my life and I'm doing all of these hard things as I evolve through life and countries and places and grad school, my perfectionism in my mind was a core part of my identity. It was a core part of who I was. And letting go of that meant that I could no longer have the types of life that I wanted. But I came, again, a seed. When my seeds came back, I was like, oh my God. And I'm saying seed as if people know what I'm talking about. But it's more of just like a spark of an idea that doesn't, it's not in a form it's not a performance form right now. It's not showable, but it matters and it has meaning. So I had this kind of concept come to me around like, well, maybe if I learn to be precise versus perfect, like I can be on target without having to deal with the feelings of not being good enough. Like it's good enough to be precise. I'll set my goal. And if I am precise to that goal, that's actually exactly where I wanted to be. And perfectionism was like that added layer of, yeah, I got to that goal, but should we also maybe, you know? And I think for me, this idea of feeling like mess was allowed was not something that I grew up with at all. It was very much like you have to do things a certain way. You need to kind of be in this role. This is the order in which you do it. And the way that my brain works never really fit into that. So I would consistently refer to myself as the black sheep of my family. And most people are like, wow, like, you know, my family, my parents are very accomplished. My sister is very accomplished. And, you know, people assume that I am also accomplished, but in relativity, I am the least accomplished of my family members. And I think it was kind of this idea of like, well, you're maybe not as rigid to these rules. Like you let a bit more mess in. Feelings mess, experience mess. Like you're not doing everything in the right order. I didn't do that. I have ADHD. And so my brain just never let me. When I started to think about this concept and I started noticing more people talking about this idea of not having room and not feeling like they had room, there was this lineage, this generational ancestral conversation that came up around how often have you had spaces held for you like that in childhood and beyond where you're allowed to be messy? And that actually deepened my collage experience because if you or anyone listening to this has done any sort of collage, then you know that a flat box that fits in underneath books or slides in somewhere is the most valuable thing you could collect. Why? Clippings, cutouts, scraps. It's like a constant mess being created. whether you're using a precision, razor to kind of cut things out or you're ripping it, there is debris that comes from collaging and creating in that way. And I love it. I love the tactile nature of it. But I was very concerned about the mess at times. And I started doing work with my scraps. And as you were talking about the brown kind of muddy markers, I was just thinking, I had this idea. I was like, ooh, I wonder if you put that on like a piece of paper. Like, did you use like good paper to do the coloring on? Because then I'm like, you could collage over that.
Yeah.
You could cut it out, like make a shape of it. And that is like the cultivation of the use of mess. Like I maybe got aware of how mess wasn't allowed, but then I kind of got deeper into this idea of how can I use mess? So now I feel like I'm a scrap hoarder at this point. But again, that's why the flat boxes, that economy is high in my home. Like an old puzzle box.
Yes.
Yeah, hand it over. I've got supplies to go in there. Things like that are just really valuable to me. And so I do like this idea of I cut this thing out 2 years ago. And at a workshop now, a random person who I've never met is like, this is exactly what I've been looking for. I've been looking for this one cutout. In my mind, I'm like, whoa, that's interesting. That's exciting. So those experiences really, I think, helped me conceptualize this idea of mass.
And I have had that same parallel experience with people at workshops or who come to me for expressive arts therapy and to reduce decision fatigue. And because we have an hour and all those things is like, I will often have a little bin of things to get started with. Because collage is often like really low, it's low skill, high reward, right? So I did an online facilitation once, and the person who came was a regular to my events, and she just brought her recycle bin. It was like she just had supper, she passed her kid off, and she arrived, and she literally had her recycle bin, and part of her collage ended up being like the takeout they ordered. Like she cut out the logo of the takeout on the bag, and so there have been these moments where I curate these boxes, these little starting places for people, and they will be like, how did you know? And I'll say, I didn't know. It's like,
I just liked
it's
it.
random from my scrap bin.
Oh my God. I wish I
Like-
had my scrap bin up here to show you. I collect thousands of magazines, but I have a collage right here. I don't even know what this belongs to. It's a page, but this is an old back of a Nat Geo from the 70s.
Okay.
And this is like a Bahamas ad. And
Like
then
a travel magazine? That's almost what it
Yeah.
looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, and I cut out this couple. And I think I wanted to engage in some directionality, but literally it's just a loose paper. It has no home. It has no home. So in my mind, I'm like, this collage now is a scrap. I could cut into this. This now has become its own entity that then is cut. I do resonate so hard with that because some people are like, how did you know to cut this phrase out? How did you know to do this? And I'm like, I don't know. It just felt right.
Yes.
Felt like that was the thing I should have done. It's textural too. Like if I got a good piece of paper, ooh, a nice thick piece of paper or an interesting texture, I'm like, yeah, that's nice.
What would you say, Meghan, to someone who's listening? They've gotten to the end of this and they're like, but what the fuck? Like how do I start? How do I restart? You know, maybe they have like a desire or an inkling or like a quiet knowing that they'd like to do something like this, but life just feels so busy and impossible. We're in total unsolicited advice territory, admittedly, but like if that person exists out in the world, which I know many of them do, what would you say to them to start, restart, start again?
Creative practice. This is going to feel a little out of left field. Start a collection. Collect something. Start a collection. That's my strongest recommendation. And I know it sounds off and weird, but if you collect something, you do need to make a decision around why it stays or why it doesn't, what you like and what you don't. And it doesn't have to be intentional in terms of like, well, what do I collect, right? Like it could be anything like a particular type of pen. It could be, a notebook design. It could be you're collecting stickers or takeout menus or anything that like you can hold and use and kind of see. I think the more you collect things, the more you develop your curation bone. And the more you develop your curation bone, the more you're able to identify the easiest way to get into a practice. I think I could give a million different invitations to be creative. Like one I love is if you have a notebook, draw a small square in the middle or wherever you want on the notebook, and then do one thing inside. You can draw, you can stick one sticker on top of it, you can doodle, you can leave it blank, like whatever you do, but commit to coming back to that square every single day on a fresh page and just look at how you've been able to do that. What most often do you put into that square when you remember? Are you pasting things down? Are you using markers? Are you kind of playing around with this? Where does your mind want you to go outside of the square? Like, are you itching to go out of the boundaries of it? Are you curious about if I did this on better paper or in a different notebook or that? To me, that's the call. That's the call. And so I think the more people get experience in consistently doing something that doesn't have to be interesting, but is consistent and or developing a collection or curating a collection of something is I probably would say those are my two strategies for sparking things again, especially if you're someone who's a mother, you're someone who has a lot of things on your mind.
I love that. I love that. And I can even imagine myself in a bit of that practice because I too can get into the rigidity, especially as someone who's had a creative practice for almost like a consistent-ish creative practice for 10 years, is that sometimes I can get in my head about like sitting in the right spot with the right book, with the right materials, with the right
Mhm,
glue, with the right things. And then if I don't have that, then
mhm,
I'm just not, then no, like I'm not just going to use crayons today. Like, there can be this perception around how to do it properly or how to
mhm,
do it. Like, well, I would really love to sit down with my whole bin of scraps and take over the whole kitchen table and put my sheet down and use
mhm.
wet glue and get out the acrylic inks. But like life doesn't always afford me that. And
No.
so I don't have an hour and a half, right? To set that up, to get into it, to do something, to clean it up. Like, I don't have 90 minutes, but I might have 5.
Mhm. And
I
that's
always
where
have 5.
accessibility comes into play.
Yeah.
It's like within arm's reach,
Mhm.
can you find something to create with? Whether you're creating a new recipe or whether you're creating something like more from a visual medium, whether you have an audio recording to do a spoken word journal entry, stream
Mhm.
of consciousness, whatever it is, if we think about art as movement, prose, music, visual mediums. Like a lot of us kind of just stick in like
Mhm.
sometimes this idea of art is visual, like painting, drawing, like sketching, etching, like these kinds of things. But dance is art.
Mhm.
Music is art. Like there's so many things that we can use in our world that art falls under in a traditional university educational perspective. That is considered art. It's not like me just making it up now in this moment, but that's art. And so if we go from those perspectives and the world opens up to us in another way, like everything is here for me to
Mhm.
use. So the more accessible things are, the more even just set the scene, that just gives us more space, more room, more opportunity. So
Mm. Yes.
creativity is for everyone. That's for sure.
It is for everyone. And on that note, I would like to thank you so much for having this conversation with me, enlightening us with your creative practice, even some of those like entry points of if someone's been thinking about this for a while or wanting to restart, they're coming out of a difficult phase in life or motherhood and they want access to that again. Those are really good entry points. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to have all of Meghan's information in the show notes. You're welcome to check that out. Follow her on Instagram and get on her Substack. It's her reflections are really amazing. So
Well,
thank you,
thank you.
Meghan.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Kayla.
You're welcome.